Please.
All right,
Guys,
these are for you.
For me.
Congratulations. All right, you ready to start? Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the Hopkinton Select Board meeting tonight, Monday, May 23rd. We'll start with points of pride.
Sure. I had a call last week from Ken Audrey on Boundary Road. Just wanted to pass on what a great job the DPW is doing on that road. And they were spreading loam in some of the areas where they work. We just wanted to make sure. And also, really to all the departments again that are short-staffed as we are in this building at the moment. So it makes everything different, and people have done an amazing job during these times. Swearing in a new police officer tonight.
Good. Yes, and thank you, Neil, for keeping everything running even when you're down a lot of people. So we appreciate it. Anyone else?
Sure. Just like to note that the Memorial Day Parade is going to be this next Monday, and want to thank particularly Rob DePease and Jason Lang for coordinating it. It's good to see these events back again in person. And thank you, Neil, and the staff. I'd like to, welcome Carol back.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll do administrative approval of the consent agenda.
I'll move we approve the consent agenda of May 23, 2022.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, approval of the public meeting minutes from May 9th, 2022.
So moved.
I will second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And Jeff is traveling and doesn't have service, and he's going to call in if he can, FYI.
Sure.
All right, so our first public appointment is Chief Yale regarding firefighter memorial.
How's everybody?
Hi, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for having us, and we all appreciate your continued support that we get from the board and this office from all year long. So what brings us here tonight, the Hopkinton Firefighters Association. This is actually 10 years for our former chief, Rick Schaefer. He passed away on September 2nd, 2012. And the Firefighters Association has looked into the feasibility of putting a firefighters memorial, not in any name of anybody. Rick's name would obviously be on it, but it would be a memorial that would be at the fire department over on the riverside, is where we've kind of checked the feasibility of that. And something that, firefighting is a very dangerous occupation. And we have a call and a full-time complement here in Hopkinton. So, we could accomplish a few different things by this, but so tonight I brought with me Sean Weldon. He's the president of the Firefighters Association, Jim Lewis, Captain Nate Martell, Jake Martin, and unfortunately Don DeLute's working, so he couldn't be here, but they are the committee that has come up with the actual plan, put a lot of time and effort so far. And what we're looking for is your blessing. We're not looking for money or anything to that effect, but we'd like to go over the plan, and we have a small short presentation for you that Captain Martell is going to do, and I'll hand it over to him. So
Great, thank you.
Really busy agenda tonight.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for seeing us this evening.
Thanks for being with us.
Always.
Oh, thank you.
One for each of us.
One for each.
So helpful, thank you.
Nate, should I open this now or should?
While you are all approved in that, if I may, little speech I prepared. It's no secret that the firefighters have a tight brotherhood and sisterhood amongst each other. The nature of hazards of our job require that we put our lives in another's hands and they put their lives in ours. If, God forbid, we need to come to your home for an emergency, I know that Jake, Joe, Sean, Jim will be there to keep me safe while I'm there to try and keep you safe. This has been a mainstay in the fire service for hundreds of years. However, sometimes that task is simply too dangerous. The Fallen Firefighters Memorial in Concord has 90 names of firefighters who have made the ultimate sacrifice in the name of service to their community. We lost a firefighter in Hopkinton approaching 10 years ago. And as we get ready to acknowledge Memorial Day this week, we feel it's appropriate to acknowledge any firefighter who has given their life for the protection of our town. We would like to erect a memorial located adjacent to the riverside of the fire station, as you see before you. The committee has chosen a bell to represent the fallen. A bell has a distinguished history in the fire service. A bell was the original method of communication, from ringing out alarms to communicating with other firefighters. It is well known amongst the fire service that a bell that rings 555 was the original code for a fire company has returned home. Over the years, this has become ubiquitous with a firefighter that has lost his or her life and ultimately returned home. The waterfall from the Kentucky River is the most clearly and idyllic backdrop for a memorial that would emit respect, sensitivity, and perpetuality. Chief Richard Schaefer is the town's first line of duty death in Hopkinton. September 2nd will mark 10 years since his passing. The timing for this memorial is right, the location is right, and the price is right. We are not looking for town money for this memorial. As Chief had mentioned, the Hopkinton Firefighters Association will use unrelated funds from separate trusts to finance this project. We also expect that there will be members of this town that will want to embrace this project and help financially. We are confident that there is a way to accept and acknowledge those who want to be a part of this very important and lasting endeavor. Tonight, we are here to present the plans and seek the support of this board to begin preparation and construction of the Hopkinton Fallen Firefighters Memorial. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's a wonderful idea. Thank you for doing it. I'm trying to envision where it would be located specifically. Is it near the bridge?
So if you are looking headlong at the fire station, so you get the eave and the bay doors, it'll be to the left of that between the river and the station. And we will cover if you look at the plans, I cannot speak to construction because I'm not a construction guy, but people much smarter than I have designed the plans and are familiar with the proper construction layout for that. That's where it will be located.
Do you have a sense of how far down the building would be?
Our current, actually, can I have you speak to that one too, because you are more part.
Yeah. How far down the side of the building?
Yeah.
We're hoping the base is actually in line with it, so it's more symmetrical.
Okay.
So it doesn't look like top wood or hanging off there, look more architectural pleasing.
Okay.
Part of the thing was we didn't want this to be in any of the like snow removal operations or anything else, because we have very limited space on that piece of property. The building takes up the majority of it in the driveway. So to get that back behind that area, there's a sidewalk that kind of would complement that, and it could be another phase. Part of these things, people would like buy a brick maybe and put their name or their family's name or whatever they really wanted, a slogan, something to that effect, and that could be a phase down the road. And it'll be just something that side of the building's got some grass on it, but it was just kind of leveled off and, not really used for much. We don't really even use that. There's a egress on that side of the building as well that walkway goes to, but that door doesn't even really get used.
Is it close enough to the river that you have to get any kind of approval from the state?
We're not sure if we need permits yet. This is still a conception, and you are actually our first stop to make sure that this is, before we put that kind of time into, maybe getting a DES permit or whatever. We want to make sure that we have your blessing to move forward with this.
Is this the extent of the memorial, or is there a fund? I'm just thinking, I know people will want to, I'm guessing will want to contribute. And so is there like an ongoing fund where people could make contributions, or would it be just specifically for this structure? Like, does thing exists where people can donate currently?
As of right now, no,
Okay.
just because like Chief said, you're our first stop, so
Gotcha.
before we put the cart in front of the horse, I'm sure our treasurer, who's unable to be here tonight, would be able to set something up. He's pretty clever.
And is that the hope, or is it, are you, you're starting with this and then potentially you would do, like, have a fund?
We have enough money to get started,
Gotcha, okay.
but we would like to, give people the opportunity if they wanted to donate either, like construction materials or, monetarily.
Mhm. And it looks like upkeep would be relatively minimal. It's not the kind of
What
structure.
would be?
Upkeep, like you don't need to, I imagine moving forward, it would be relatively minimal to,
Yeah, we need some base work under it with some better gravel and compaction and stuff like that. But we've already talked to some a local guy that actually drew this conception for us, and as well as a landscaper that would be able to do that with some smaller equipment to be able to get in there and make that base happen.
right?
And we do believe that regular routine upkeep would be not much more than shoveling it out,
Yeah,
pressure washing it once a year. And the crew that's on duty should be able to help handle that stuff.
right.
So I guess for the benefit of the audience that doesn't see this, the proposal would be a 16-foot square, 2-foot high block, and then you'd be putting the bell on a 4-foot square column that's 3 feet high.
Correct.
Believe it would really complement the station and some of the old and some of the new. I was pretty impressed with the plan that they came up with.
Would the idea be that people could just access this and come see it like when they wanted, or? would
It's
it-
really a pretty common thing to have a memorial of some sort like this at your fire station. They're all around the state. A lot of people drive right by them because they don't really even know what they are. But there's a lot of 9/11 memorials that if you solicit New York City Fire Department, they'll bring you a piece of the building. I mean, there's all different ways that people pay tribute to their fallen.
We also feel it's set back far enough, but still close to the river. People just walking through the Kentucky Village will be able to see it from there and then just take a few steps over to go actually enjoy it, or pay respect to it.
Mhm.
If you ever have the time up on at the Fire Academy in Concord, there's an eternal flame. All the members of the fallen from New Hampshire are on that actual monument, and I would drive down there and walk up to it. It's beautiful. They do a big service every October. I walked Rick's widow up there every year since his passing, and he's obviously on that memorial, and it's very near and dear to people that have lost loved ones in the line of duty. So very, very respectful.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Certainly supportive of the concept.
Yeah, same. This is looks like a really nice memorial to have in town and complement the station.
Yeah, so I think you have our official blessing. Thank you for the thorough and thoughtful presentation. And yes, I think this is a lovely, wonderful idea. So thank you for.
And I'll make sure we keep you up to date as things progress and as they're moving forward. So.
Okay, great.
Do you want these
Thank
back?
Yeah, do you guys want?
For your next audience?
No, please keep those so we can reference it if you have any other questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything you do. Thank you all.
People that had asked, we said the boundary issues would be about 6:30 at our appointment, so if you
Mhm. Beyond.
want to jump to that.
Yeah, I was thinking we would not jump to that.
Yeah.
Sorry. So then I think we could jump to Houston Barn, right? Is that a,
Oh, is
Sure.
Officer Steve on here?
all right, so because our next public appointment is not until, we've got 15 minutes till our swearing in. And then the next public appointment is at 6:15. We're gonna jump to old business with the Houston Barn Construction Manager selections. I think we can fit that in before 6 o'clock. So Neil, do you want to give the overview of our meeting?
Basically, we put out an RFQ. We received one submittal. The committee, the group that you had established looked at it last week, it does meet all the qualifications. It's Milestone, you have a copy of the packet.
Yeah.
Who did the preliminary estimates. And so the recommendation is to move forward with them. And I guess along with that recommendation is that the members of that group that was established be the sort of the building committee and consultants. And I'll work with them through the project and they'll consult through that. And the way we've done other projects is change orders and things I've been able to authorize within budget. Clearly, if something major we're changing, like we couldn't afford metal on the roof and we're thinking about going to asphalt, that would be a decision that would come back to the board.
Do you think that the RFQ was widely enough distributed?
It was in the paper, it was sent out. It's a hard time for people in general. And we were flexible around the schedule. If you saw the schedule, largely the engineering would be done this year, with construction actually happening in about a year.
So looking for a motion to accept the Milestone as the construction manager.
I believe that's what we need.
Okay,
And it will reach out to them and start the process.
Did the barn committee look at this? Do they have any?
They did.
They did.
Yeah.
They're good with this.
They are.
so I'll move it.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Neil. So,
Probably give you an update on the petition to
For
lay
all.
out just sort of the process.
okay,
So what I believe is the next step is we need to do a title search on all abutting properties, which is paid for by the petitioner. So I was going to get a quote and talk to him and make sure he was willing to do that because we need to give notice, 30 days notice of the hearing to not only the property owners, but any tenants for life, or mortgage holders, or anybody who has any interest in any of those properties. And when it's a class 6 road that it's been petitioned to lay over, it is the petitioner's responsibility to pay for
mhm.
that. And as far as setting a date for that, it's really hard until we know when the title search will be done, but it has to be 30 days. There has to be a clear 30-day notice to everyone.
Neil, could you just explain for the benefit of the audience where on Old South Road we're talking?
Sure, if you know South Road, you go down South Road and all of a sudden, quite a ways out, you take a right angle turn. And if you look, there's it's a house driveway, but it's actually an old class 6 road. there. So the owner and South Road goes down and around and out. The owner of one of the properties on that, who actually has his frontage of his house on South Road, the other side, but the back of his property is on Old South Road, has asked that that road be laid out there. So, and once they submit a petition, the process begins and has to go through the process. As of now, he would like the town to open it up. There's been no offer of any financial support.
That was a really good summary.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
That was a good
Actually,
description.
it's my 5th time today. The phone's been
Yeah.
ringing with questions. Good, but it made sense.
And that's like that's a required step. There's no
The,
there's no like vote that we can do before or after that. That just has to happen.
I think you decided at last meeting, and the recommendation is that you do go forward with the public hearing, even no matter what.
Got it.
And give them the opportunity. That's really the recommendation of like a hardware to travel and all of that.
All right.
Tyler Bridge.
Yeah, so can we do, thank you, Neil, Tyler Bridge bids, that new business?
Sometimes I get this time. Though I'd rather be going this way.
Yeah, right.
No.
Pull this up because I think it's the. Technology is great.
When it works. Doesn't usually work.
If you look at the. Let's try this one.
There you go.
People at home can see it too. These were the bids we received. They were due last Thursday afternoon at 1. We actually were really excited to receive 5 bids for this bridge project. One of the contractors, who actually isn't the lowest bidder, was saying this was a project that they like to see because it was big enough to be worth doing, but small enough to fit in between other things. So that was good. He also suggested that if we have big projects, we can let them work in the winter, we may get more bidders. But so these were the bids. ED Sweat is by far the lowest bid. ED Sweat was the contractor that did the first phase of Tyler Bridge. So they meet all the qualifications. They're pre-qualified by the state of New Hampshire. So the recommendation is to award them the bid. And this should be done before snow flies.
Thanks.
And this, just as a reminder, this is the second half. The first time the bridge went out to bid, it came in much higher than the engineers had estimated. So the joint that had to be done was done last year, and this is to do the rest. I believe there's just about 800,000 left in the bond. So actually, the fact that this came in where it did means we can do it. We've sort of been waiting to see. The 700,000 was the engineer estimate for this work, but last year's bids were way off, so we weren't sure. But this came in under their estimate. So
On the phase 1, how did the bids compare to the actual cost?
the actual cost was it $17,000 or $28,000 under the bid price? Got it. So it came in under. Great. Almost at, but under.
Got it. So engineers under, bids over, but then actual back up to that.
Right. So for the bids that came in, they came in right on.
And the recommendation to go with Sweat is coming from you and Dan?
And the engineers.
And
Do we need an official motion?
Yes, that was.
I'll move, we approve the ED Sweat Inc. Bid for the Tyler Bridge.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Thank you, Neil.
That's great.
So, um, if everybody's here, are we good to go before 6 or is that, are we good? Okay. So I think, I think we have everyone we need for the swearing in of Police Officer Joshua Stevens. Am I correct?
Yes.
Got everyone we need? All right, great. Then we can go ahead and do that.
Have the paperwork.
That is not it. Okay. Okay. Can you sign that? Do you want to make a few remarks?
Thank you, everybody. We have Officer Joshua Stevens starting with us today. He comes to us full-time certified from the Danville Police Department. He previously worked with the Pittsfield Police Department, and he had worked part-time with Barnstead in the Newton Police Department. So he is now gracefully with us. He lives in Hooksett with his wife and 3 young children. And I'd like to introduce Officer Joshua Stevens.
Read the oath. All right, you want to stand over there and I'll stand centered. I'll try to time this right for you. I, Joshua Stevens,
I, Joshua Stevens,
do solemnly and sincerely swear
do solemnly and sincerely swear
and affirm
and affirm
that I will bear faith
that I will bear faith
and true allegiance
and true allegiance
to the United States of America and the state of New Hampshire,
to the United States of America and the state of New Hampshire,
and will support the constitutions thereof.
and will support the constitutions thereof.
So help me God.
So help me God.
I, Joshua Stevens,
I, Joshua Stevens,
do solemnly and sincerely swear
do solemnly and sincerely swear
that I will faithfully
that I will faithfully
and impartially discharge
and impartially discharge
and perform all the duties
and perform all the duties
incumbent upon me as a patrol officer
incumbent upon me as a patrol officer,
according to the best of my abilities,
according to the best of my abilities,
agreeably to the rules
agreeably to the rules
and regulation of this Constitution
and regulation of this Constitution
and the laws of the state of New Hampshire.
and the laws of the state of New Hampshire.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks to you for allowing us to interrupt.
Please do it again next meeting.
Congratulations.
We will have another officer probably mid-July if everything goes well.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Do you mean to sign that?
Thomas, did you sign that?
I signed that one. I didn't sign the yellow one.
I don't. We'll bring it. Okay.
Need one.
Sign.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's because Breeny's really good at reading code. It's true.
Oh, this was in the front of this.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Right. So, like, we're uncharacteristically ahead of schedule.
I can do
Um,
my update.
all right, perfect.
So I have 13 minutes.
Yeah.
Some updates. You saw in your packet, the Blackford deed, which we have received back from the registry. It has been reported. along with the ad, so the ad will go out tomorrow if there's no other comments. Our heating oil price, we go out to bid with the school district. They actually do it. We appreciate all the work Michelle does on that. Came in at $3.51.9, which actually isn't a bad price. Unfortunately, we were at $1.96 currently we're at $1.96 until July 1. We budgeted, I know, I'm sure they don't like delivering oil right now at $1.96. And we budgeted $2.50 per gallon. So we'll have to watch that very closely. Really, that's for the second half of the year is $1 above budget. Often we use more oil in the first half of the year, which we're over budget by 50 cents. But we will have to watch that. I keep contacting the surveyor who says we are on their list. I keep telling them, tired of telling you all that. But we also had a request from Janet Ward, who is interested in having a gathering here on June 9th to have a viewing party of the primetime hearing on the January 6th. So I just wanted to see if there was any objection to that. The building is free then, but
She wants to be here.
to be here, to just have people gather. So.
Do we have like a use process, like an application process?
We do
Yeah.
that, and basically anybody who pays who's an outside group, they would pay like for example, presidential candidates pay to use the building.
Yeah.
Community groups, regardless of who they are, both the Republican and the Democratic Town committees have met here, and we certainly are civic groups and we don't charge them.
And Janet would be hosting like as an individual and not part of a group?
Yeah, it didn't seem like there was a group. She wasn't part of a specific group that was saying they wanted to use it.
Okay. Does anyone have any problems with that?
No? I mean,
Okay.
Yeah. I assume that she would have to follow whatever process anybody else would.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Normal. I feel like I should have more to take, 8 more minutes, but
So what was the thing in my mind? The fence with the high school,
yes, so we have put the deposit on the fence.
right?
So your schedule, and it all is up to the vendor when they get there. Our goal was really to be done before sports started in the fall. And it really depends on the vendor. So,
Okay,
so that is scheduled.
moving along, okay.
Trying to think if there was anything else
Um,
outstanding.
And then I can't remember where we left it, but the issue that was flagged for me about parking on the sidewalk on Park.
Yes, so in talking to really everybody involved, we all agree that there should be no parking on the side of the street across from George Park,
Right,
that
Okay.
on Park Avenue. Or was the concern, those are the concerns we've received the most of.
right. So can we put up signs?
We can, and we'll bring
Okay.
in an ordinance for.
Oh, right, that's what the ordinance.
There
Okay.
hadn't been agreement amongst all the people involved.
I
before.
see, okay,
I think there is. So that way we can post it.
okay,
So there would just be parking on the George Park side.
mhm,
The fence also hopefully will encourage people. We have a lot of parking. I know you have to walk a little, but there's between the high school parking lot and the
The new-
parking lot
yeah.
just off Kearsarge. there's-
Right.
there's-
yep. All right. You have other, or do you have follow-ups for Neil?
Where you were talking about the oil and the budget, what about health insurance? you have any more updates on health insurance?
We are coming under budget. That was the last. So.
All right.
There's only one thing on your other list.
I can go to other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Move on to other.
I've gotten a question about if a crosswalk could be put in downtown Kentucky from Mr. Mike's over to either the barber shop or the Everyday Cafe.
No. You have to, you have investigated that. You have to have if you're going to put in a crosswalk, you have to have a place for it to come from and to, and there's no place for a crosswalk to go to on that side of the road. So, right, there's no sidewalk, basically. And where there is a sidewalk further down, it's way too close to the intersection. So we have investigated that.
And the state requires that? That's like the state of,
And that's a state.
that's a state road. So there's no, we can't like petition for an exception or anything.
Yeah, I think we require, that's what we basically did.
It is a really unfortunate setup we have down there. And I've almost been hit several times lately heading down Kearsarge where people think it's a 4-way stop and it's 3-way stop. Is that also state controlled in front of the fire department?
No,
Oh, have we done any, I mean, I can't be the only person who's experienced this problem. Have we done any like studies or anything on that spot?
we have not.
Interesting.
I think everybody knows it's not a great place, but
Yeah.
I think at one point they looked at options for that area, but nothing's been looked at recently. But probably could add signage that says either 3-way stop or like when you're coming down Kearsarge, if it says oncoming traffic does not stop, there are signs that could be added to the stop signs.
Yeah.
To if that's the.
I was just curious because I had misremembered that I thought that was state run right there, that like that was another spot we like couldn't control, but.
No, they control Park Avenue, but we
Okay,
control everything
okay.
in Pine and Kearsarge.
Huh. I would be interested in knowing a little bit more about potentially doing something there. It does seem like a really, like if you're not from town, like, I don't know, I can see how people almost blow those stop signs, not thinking that people, or thinking that people are going to stop coming from the fire department.
There are a lot of roads.
Yeah.
I think my understanding, and I was this was before my time, but they talked about having more of a T intersection because one of the issues is the fire trucks coming out and going around to go up Pine Street. So but it's been a long time since I think that's been looked at very closely.
Is there anything else we could do? And if we can't put a crosswalk in there, can we put in like going back to Ken's question, is there anything else we can do, or is it really up to the state because that's their domain?
It is. When we were walking the sidewalks for the TAP grant, we did walk with engineers and tried to see what options there could be, especially if the sidewalk is redone on Mr. Mike's side, where could it be? How could it be connected to the other side? That's one of the biggest downfalls of the village is that it is not very walkable. We have parking by the gazebo, we have parking on Cedar Street. You almost have to switch lots to go to the businesses on the other side, so.
What's the state's planning process on all that? Because I know that like they had some like 10-year plan that gets acted on and something. How do we insert ourselves in that, or can we insert ourselves into that process?
Their plan is we can apply for TAP grants which we would do. So they might have 80% funding.
Got it.
And we would pay 20, or they're always happy for municipalities to do work. They'll work with you if you're paying for it.
So if we're down to build sidewalks and crosswalks and stuff, they'll let us do it?
Yeah, probably.
Probably, right.
If they meet the guidelines.
Okay. Got it.
And we do put in the sidewalks.
Yeah.
That are there.
Okay. Sorry, Ken, didn't mean to take us off on the.
No,
The
I
traffic
think
issue.
it's worth talking about for sure. I understand about in front of the fire station. And to me, it's particularly the time when students or parents will be bringing their kids to the middle high school.
Mhm.
And if there was this, an additional stop sign there, it might back up onto,
I know, yeah,
You
right,
can't add another stop sign. I don't think that would work.
yeah. Too short right
But you
there.
could add signs,
Thing,
made
not,
everybody else aware that they don't stop.
Yeah.
One direction that doesn't stop, yeah.
yeah. Do you have others?
I actually seeing Bonnie here and Bob here. I had seen an article in the Concord Monitor about fabric disposal. And I wonder if that's another thing that we could take advantage of to reduce the amount of tonnage going into the hopper.
Yeah, I think there are receptacles that you can put out. We could probably have one at the transfer station. And that's what they do is they package it up, mail it, and send it to Africa. People repurpose it and sell it and that sort of thing. That kind of that program. It kind of implies that it's a charity, but it is a way for them to make some money by shipping it overseas, but then also providing livelihood for people on the other end to sell. That's one way to do it.
And I was just looking at it as a way to maybe reduce the tonnage, saving taxpayer money.
Yeah, I think maybe we could just talk more about that so people know it's there. There used to be, there are the yellow metal boxes. There used to be one at the Colonial Village Park, but I'm not sure if it's still there. There's one in front of the Methodist Church. I think that one is just for clothing and shoes. And then there's one at the transfer station, which I think you can put any kind of textiles into. It needs to be bagged.
This was a company, Help See, that does pick up curbside pickup in Bow, or was where the article was related to. So I'll just put that thought in your mind.
Yeah, thank you.
That I'm done.
Anyone else have other? No other? No other? Okay. So do we know, is our 6:15 person here? Greg Oren? Are you Greg?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Greg. Would you be willing to start 1 minute early? Okay. All right.
We've talked on the phone, but I didn't know.
Okay.
This is just a narrative that you can have to refer to after the fact, but it's pretty much what I'm going to go through. The purpose of me being here is to inquire whether your community would want to participate in a regional cable channel. And it's not, and I'm reluctant to say cable because there are other aspects of it that go beyond cable. TDS Telecom already has engaged us, and we've been providing programming through them for probably the last 6 or 7 years. And even before that, when it was MCT Telecom and Kearsarge Cable. We, over the last 50 years, have been producing local programming, primarily on cable, but in the last 10 years, we built 3 broadcast TV stations that we operated out of Claremont. And the one thing that we learned is that with the nature of the marketplace today, and the amount of advertising revenue being diminished on the local level, it was really hard to keep these broadcast stations going. And we ended up selling them to WCAX in Burlington, Vermont, which they certainly have the infrastructure to, address that much better than we could. So then the question became, what do we do to continue to provide local programming on a local level? And some of you may be familiar with some of our programming, Yankee Chronicle and Game of the Week, which, high school sports and things similar to that. And the answer was starting.
Do you mind holding on 1 second?
Yep.
Speed Jeff? Jeff?
Hello?
Hi. I am going to make a motion that we allow Jeff to join via phone.
Second.
All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Yes, Thomas?
Yes.
Ken? Stephen?
Yes.
All right. Jeff, we are talking to Greg, I don't know, Irwin?
You're close.
Irwin?
Grin.
Irwin, the person who's here to talk about a regional cable channel. So he is presenting to us right now.
Excellent, thank you.
No problem. All right, sorry about that.
So anyway, as we moved ahead, we started exploring what are the possibilities to maintain local programming. And one of the issues that was brought up was the fact that with the diminishing of advertising revenue, Concord Monitor has kind of scaled back a lot of their coverage. The Valley News has scaled back theirs, and it's kind of left this hole in the donut, which, you guys are kind of on the fringe of. But we looked at the communities that we thought might fit. And part of that fit was the fact that they weren't taking advantage of the franchise provision, which allows for a local cable access channel. So we've gone through all the communities. We're doing this presentation that I'm doing today, and we've gotten pretty good cooperation from everybody because the channel isn't being used. The questions that have been posed to me are around, well, what if we don't like what's on? And what if we, if we're allocating our community channel to this purpose? And to me, what I see evolving is more of a partnership, because it's going to be nonprofit. We've already created an association with NCTV, which is the access operation in Newport, and they're going to technically manage the operation and also provide some of the programming and be a partner in the group. The communities involved, and as I laid out here, are pretty much down the line. Newport, Sunapee, New London, Bradford, Warner, blah, 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 blah. Wilmont has formally accepted our proposal, and New London, we're on the schedule in a couple weeks, but we don't anticipate any problems there. As I said, TDS, they kind of anticipated and worked with us to keep this from being too cumbersome by simply allocating a leased access channel, which, as long as we're a nonprofit, they'll charge us $1 a year to provide that conduit. So with Warner and Bradford, Newberry, and Sutton, we don't even have to go to the communities. I mean, and the channel is already on. And here in Hopkinton and Kentucky, those cable subscribers that have TDS already see the channel. So all we're trying to do is to free up the Comcast side of the scenario. The other aspect of this is we're putting in the technology where on our website, anybody who doesn't even have cable, if they have enough bandwidth into their home, will be able to watch the channel on their computer. So we feel pretty good about the universal nature of providing the programming. The programming is already the stuff that we have in place, but there's a lot of airtime available, and that if communities want to get involved, the question, one of the questions posed to me was, what if somebody walks into the office and says, I'd like this local program to be run. You need to decide what, as a community, whether they'll have access to this channel or not, and then what provisions there are with it. We don't want it to be a traditional local access channel. And mostly it doesn't have to do with content, but it has to do with technical parameters that, if people want to provide us programming, that we have to set the bar somewhere in terms of the quality. And, we don't have the resources of somebody like Channel 9, but we also, we'd like to have somebody behind a camera that knows which end to look through and what button to push, and the camera's steady. And those are all things that could be refined as we develop it. So basically what we're asking you to do is to become a partner in this group. We'll come under the umbrella of NCTV's nonprofit status, and they'll manage, their accounting will manage all the funds and funding. The concept that we're operating from is to do primarily a PBS style program support network with PBS style fundraising and underwriting by businesses. And we've already converted several of our businesses who are excited. I mean, HR Clough is one of them in this area that has essentially said, wow, if you guys can continue doing what you're doing, we want to be associated with it. So first of all, you would need to free up that channel and formally approach Comcast and say, yes, we would like this channel to be carried here. I was hoping to come to you. The Comcast has the capability to simply route the signal into your cable system here. But what we sense is an unwillingness. They're kind of making us jump through some hoops where we'll have to have a demodulator in the head end that services this area. And I don't know that for sure yet, or whether that's just a bargaining position they're starting out at. But we feel that, it enhances the cable service that they provide by having, local high school sports. And we're doing all of our local high school sports live now with replays. And in New London, we're doing the Hospital Days Parade live. And so we're trying to do as many local events. And we're really not asking any financial support from any of the communities. I think it would be incumbent upon you to talk through what position you want to take as a community in terms of, there's no reason that your selectmen's meetings need to be on cable. But we also, because it's provided here, but on the other hand, there may be town meetings or important hearings on topics that, may provide a conduit into homes that for people that might not be here. So I think that those are evolutionary things. That's a year from now, making a phone call and just saying, what would it take us to get this particular event on? So that's it in a nutshell. We conceptually, and this is a lot of stuff on paper right now, plan to set up an advisory board where we have a member of each of the communities in the group to help steer it, move it into its future. So, questions?
Can you just remind me, when you said we'd have to ask Comcast to free up the channel, does that mean that it exists and it's just sitting empty, or like,
Yes,
I see,
essentially.
okay.
You need to inform them that you would like this channel to be used as our community access channel, and that we will, the YCN or whatever the designation, we're not even real sure at this point, how we're going to brand it. If we could come up with some snappy image that would portray this area, we may build that image around.
Did I hear right that there may be some infrastructure upgrades, at least according to Comcast, that are necessary?
Maybe.
And so who bears the cost of those upgrades?
Well, what we're trying to bear that cost if it's reasonable.
Okay.
If it costs us $1,000 or $2,000 per community to install this stuff, we'd like to take that on. If they come to us and say $5,000, I'm not sure what we would do.
Okay.
I think that, personally, my feeling is, and I've been dealing with Comcast for years, we had with one of our broadcast stations, we had must carry. We had met all the must carry rules with Comcast. And when we started negotiating with them, it started out by saying, well, we have a floor of lawyers in Philadelphia, and we agree that you have the right to request this, but we can make this last a long time. So that's pretty much why we're putting this playback capability on our website. TDS has been a really good player with this. I mean, they've even thrown ideas at us to make it easier. So I don't know if in a public forum, I should say that it doesn't matter to me whether Comcast is or isn't involved. I just think that we need to go through the formality of approaching them and seeing if they think it's a valuable part of their television lineup.
Do you know how many homes TDS serves versus Comcast in this town?
In Hopkinton, I don't.
Yeah.
They're universal in those 4 towns that I had mentioned earlier, but they're also, I would say they're about 40% in New London, and they're probably 30% in Wilmot.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of numbers. And I don't know if you have franchise fees here. I didn't look that deep into it, but you can kind of tell comparing Comcast to TDS what you get from them for franchise remunerations.
I don't know if we do that.
In terms of the programming that you present, would there be an advisory board that would determine this is too controversial, or yes, this is something that we should air? How is that determined?
Well, in terms of programming that we produce, we don't try to steer away from controversy, but remember the old fairness doctrine? That's what we try to practice, is if somebody comes in and says this, we want to find an opposing opinion to balance it out in our programming. But in 50 years of doing this, I can probably count on one hand the number of times that I was really kind of uncomfortable with content that was brought to us. I like to think our programming is warm and fuzzy,
And you feel that way about outside groups asking to?
Well, that's, I think that's where, we'll make some recommendations to the communities, but once the community opens up that channel, then they have to have some guidelines, and it can be as simple as saying, we allocate this channel 100% to this new entity called YCN or whatever we call it, and leave it at that, and let the bigger advisory board make those determinations of what they will or won't allow.
And who's what's the makeup of the bigger advisory board?
Well, what we're hoping is that we'll get a member of each community.
So the 8 communities.
Yeah, 8 communities, and then maybe the administrator for the channel out of Newport, just because technically he's running it. My role in all of this it's pretty simple. I'm 71 years old. I've been doing this for 50 years. I find value in that programming, and I'd like to sustain it, and I'll keep doing my part as long as I can, but I fell off a ladder last year and had ACL surgery, and it made me realize that I'm probably not going to go on forever.
Or at least up a ladder. You were talking about 8 communities.
Yep.
Would it be the same program shown at the same time to the 8?
Yeah. And right now, the programming would probably be dominated by local high school sports. We're looking at Newport, Sunapee, Kearsarge, and Hopkinton. But as the high schools have moved into the Pixelot system, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but they do their own live broadcast. Most of them don't have any announcers. There's no replay. There's no format other than a camera that follows the action. And that's where we feel that we still can provide something unique to the communities in that
Did the schools get any revenue out of their methodology?
I'm not sure. I know that at Kearsarge, it cost them about $25,000 to install the equipment. Some of it was offset by some of the COVID monies because they installed it during the time when people couldn't come into the gym for games. Whether I know that the company itself generates advertising revenue for the country. It's a company that they created this model with Texas high school football. And that's, their major income, whether they share it back to the schools or not. I've never.
I think that would be something we would want to understand, because I don't want to undercut a revenue source the schools may have or they may not.
And my other question was that you said that there's no sort of financial support that we need to provide. And I couldn't tell if that was just for now or if at some point in the future that may change.
If you're simply a conduit, I don't imagine that it would change.
Okay.
If you want to have some programming generated specifically from Hopkinton to be on this channel, that may be something for you to consider in the future. But like I said, I see this as evolutionary, that couple of years from now, sitting around, somebody says, why don't we do this? You know, and then you start exploring the implications of it and the value to the community and, you know.
And there could potentially be a cost for some of those things down the.
Yeah, and there may be people in the community who have the technical capability to, you know, if you're doing the Memorial Day parade or whatever, to actually do that and provide it at no cost. You know, I mean, we want to be taking programming from the local communities. And I mean, in the long run, I would like to see 24/7 of nothing but programming that reflects the communities that are on this network. That's where its long-term value is.
All right. Jeff, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I was late, so this may have been answered. Is this one channel shared by the 8 communities, or are you talking about a separate channel for Hopkinton?
One channel shared by 8 communities.
So we're not going to get to the point of broadcasting town meeting because towns all have town meeting on the same day generally. So,
Good point.
you know, I'm trying to be realistic. If there's no cost to us, which is the most, I'm sure Ken already asked that question, but I just want to make sure that there's not a financial commitment on the part of the board here to get this up and running.
Yeah, the ask, I think, is whether we would move forward to make an inquiry to Comcast. Is that right? Yeah. So I think that would be what we have to decide if we want to take the next step. But yes, Greg said there would be there's no financial commitment necessary from the town.
I mean, one of the things that we do, and we have done for probably 10 years, is we televise the deliberative session for the Kearsarge School District. That's something that they feel they set aside in their budget money to, you know, cover. If you approached me and said, what would it cost? It would basically be whatever my crew costs are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's important that we have competent cameramen, competent directors, you know, and it doesn't mean they have to be working for ABC, but as I said, they need to know which end of a camera to look through.
But it's not as easy as taking your iPhone out and recording it and like streaming it to some website. You need like, specific equipment to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the iPhone's pretty amazing. And if you put an iPhone on a tripod and you have an auxiliary audio input, so somebody actually talks into a microphone, you can produce some pretty good stuff nowadays. I mean, I wish I had these tools 50 years ago. So I don't want to minimize the ability to utilize, you know, the tools that we're all surrounded with.
Yeah, I just was, I guess, underlining the point that it is not just turning your camera on your phone, filming. There's a good bit more that goes into it.
All right. So, well, thank you for coming in. Do we want to make a decision about whether or not to approach Comcast? Neil, do you have any concerns you want to?
No, I think
Okay.
we're covered.
Okay.
I guess I'd want to first understand if by going this route and, you know, airing school sports, will our school system lose any revenues?
Yeah, I think we could probably find that out relatively quickly.
Yeah.
And let me say that I have to deal with the school systems and setting up schedules. And they're the arbiter of whether we can even be there or not. And
That's a good point. Yeah. Okay.
so but I just assume that, you know, I know with Hopkinton, because Jim Rivers has been doing some of the play-by-play for the sports, and he's good. That they actually probably, and I haven't seen it, but their product probably looks 10 times better than most of the high schools that are in the Pixel-Lot system. I think that, we don't want to go anywhere we're not welcome to.
So do you guys feel like we need to discuss more? Because if yes, I would suggest we put a pin in this so we can move on. Or, I mean, I'm okay with taking the next step because I think it sounds like we're at least gonna have to inquire with Comcast. It doesn't seem like this is gonna be like a super fast process, is my sense. So I would be supportive of taking that step.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I was hoping that we could start that process and also speak to this
And
at
ask
the same time. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fine with me.
okay,
Our contract with Comcast does provide public access.
okay. So do you need to talk to Greg more about next steps or are we at some point? Okay.
Probably, you've dealt with Comcast.
Whoever their
I don't
government,
have to go on the phone and wait.
well, whoever their government relations officer is now is the person you'd call and say, this is what we want to do. I mean, it's,
Interesting,
We have
okay,
some contacts.
yeah,
okay. All right, well, thank you very much for coming in.
thank
It
you.
was nice to meet you.
And feel free to email me if you have any other.
Okay.
questions pop up.
I think we'll probably keep you posted on how things are going.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. That brings us back to old business and the Boundary Road building permit request. So, Neil, would we typically, I don't recall, invite the homeowners to speak to it first, or is everyone okay with that, or?
Yeah, the
Okay.
petition.
Yes, so Jeff, we have, it's Shannon, right? Shannon Greenwood, who is here with us on the Boundary Road building permit request. So do you want to just?
So we're basically here to review. So last time we came, we submitted a petition to waive the municipality's responsibility and liability because the main complaint was the upgrading of the road. So in order to build our home, we did some research, and it's been done several times, most recently in 2018, where properties were allowed to be built on Class 6 roads. So it's not something that isn't uncommon or that hasn't been done. We provided the same document that was done on the most recent one, and it was decided at that meeting that it needed to have review and comment from DPW and planning, which from my communication with Neil, those things have been done. And so we are looking to see if we can get that waiver signed.
Okay. Great. Okay, so.
And you have in your packet the memo from the planning board.
Mhm.
DPW had no concerns because it really largely doesn't affect them. It doesn't really change what they do.
Mhm.
Both the police and the police chief and fire chief also asked them specifically if it would cause any issues, and neither of them felt that this would cause any issues. That's the staff sort of.
Okay. All right. So I was going to suggest that the board have a discussion, and then I have a feeling some people are here to comment on this, even though it is not a public hearing. But I think we can bump public comment for those who want to make comments. Are you guys okay with that approach? Discussing it amongst.
I mean, would it make more sense to do public comment on this first and then we can discuss all of it? Because I don't want to like presuppose what some of the comments are going to be.
Yeah, I would just like to ground us in what we're actually talking about though, quickly. So, because we did get some emails on this. So I just want to be clear that what we're dealing with right now is a state law, RSA 674-41. So what is before the select board is actually quite narrow. We're not talking about town meeting. We're not talking about converting a Class 6 road. We are talking about whether or not we can issue a building permit for this spot on Boundary Road. So I did quite a deep dive on 674. So it's relatively straightforward in terms of the process, which is we're the local governing body. We had the planning board review and make some comments. And once we decide if we do grant the building permit, a waiver is signed saying the town is not responsible for liability. So I just want to be clear that the discussion is actually about public safety with respect to this part of the road. And so the NHMA the Municipal Association has some very helpful guidance on this. And there's a quote from a New Hampshire Supreme Court case saying, why does RSA 674-41 limit building? The purpose of the limitation on building on Class 6 highways is to provide against scattered or premature subdivision as would necessitate the excessive expenditure of public funds. So that's one quote. And then also there is a handbook, and I noticed it was in our materials, although I found it separately. I don't know who came up with this. Handy. Okay, so I have.
Well used.
Good. I thought you probably had a copy. So this is the NHMA's book, A Hard Road to Travel. It's about New Hampshire's many laws around local highways, streets, and trails. And I just want to read a quote that I think is very instructive and needs to guide us here. So this says, this is about whether or not denying a permit like this could be considered a taking. If a town's true motive for denying permission to build on a lot under RSA 674-41 relates to something other than the adequacy of the road, for example, because it wants the land to remain wild as some sort of preserve, then such a denial is indeed quite likely to constitute a taking. This law provides a way to regulate road access adequacy and is not a backdoor way of regulating or preventing development itself. So I just want to be really clear about the statute that we're dealing with and sort of the scope, which is, as you can hear, quite narrow. So I know people commented on the master plan, which again, I appreciate people reaching out. I read every email very carefully. I totally get people's concerns. I don't think that something like this would be at odds with the master plan. In fact, the master plan refers to this statute and it says the town defers to RSA 674-41 regarding building on a Class 6 road. And then it goes through what the process is. So I do think one thing that I have sort of pulled out of this whole education is that I do think Hopkinton should have a policy on this, which we don't. And I think that would be helpful. And a lot of towns do have policies for this very situation. And a lot of them are very similar looking. And I think we could come up with a good policy to follow. So I will just say that I think that for the board, we should keep in mind this is the statute. It's pretty narrow. We're talking about the issue of public safety. We have heard DPW, police and fire do not have an issue. I went out and saw the spot myself, and it does look like there's a very clear spot to turn around. There's a fire hydrant out there. So I think the public safety issue is, I just don't think that's an issue. And then in terms of like this language, scattered and premature subdivisions, I mean, we're talking about a part of this road that has other houses already there. And so just looking at it myself, I think it's a really tough argument to say that somehow one more house there would be disruptive to that part of that road. So that's my sort of grounding and intro and where I'm sort of starting on this. So I don't know if others want to jump in here.
I'm not an attorney, but I have real concerns about going against what town meeting voted.
Okay, but Ken, I just want to make the point that that actually is entirely separate and distinct. That was a vote to convert the road. So this actually, I think it gets confusing because it feels like something that like the town has spoken on. But what's before us under the statute, there is no public input. This is about the governing body making a decision using the facts that are before us. So town meeting actually is totally irrelevant.
I mean, I agree that, like, I don't want to go, if this was the vote at town meeting, then I would totally agree with you, but one of the problems I have with the town meeting vote is that a lot of the comments at town meeting were very specific about, this is not about whether or not someone should build here or not, it's about whether or not the road should be converted. And also, the town meeting vote was really close. The town meeting vote to me puts me somewhere right in the middle of, it was off by like 13 votes. And to me, that says this, like, the town doesn't necessarily say really strong way one way or the other. To me, the town meeting vote kind of puts me right in the middle. I'd be looking for something else to try to help make a decision.
I don't have anything to add other than what you said, Brittany, because I think you summarized the job that we have to do pretty well. I think just contribute that we've already granted this before for other properties. And if there is some uneasiness about, under what circumstances we're allowing building to take place on a Class 6 road, then I think the way to address that is with a policy that sets some parameters for what we consider to be acceptable, what's not, what sort of factors we look into. Absent that sort of policy, though, I mean, I think I agree wholeheartedly with what Brini said. Our review of this is fairly limited. And I in no way think that the town meeting vote ties our hands and obligates us to do anything. Because that was a totally different sort of legal avenue for them to get where they wanted to get.
Yeah, and so I think that's really important to keep in mind is that the homeowners, or sorry, the landowners could have gone to town meeting, which they did. They could petition the board. This is a path they can take well within their rights, because some of the emails sort of suggested surprise that the select board was even talking about this, and it is entirely appropriate for this to be brought to us and entirely appropriate for us to discuss it. I would also say that I think I saw a lot of concern about slippery slope, which I totally understand. I'm very conservation minded myself. I'm on the open space committee. I care about these things. But I think if the facts were different, we could have a very different discussion and a very different outcome. We are looking at the facts that are before us. And so I just don't think there's any weight to the slippery slope argument, because you could change one fact about this and it could change our decision. And it really is about, I think, the proximity of this property to what is an established town road. It is so close. There's houses right there. I mean, so if we were talking about disrupting the Class 6 road somehow, or a chunk of a road where like there's no other houses and it was gonna be really hard for fire and public safety to get there, that'd be a different story, but we're not talking about that. And in fact, this property, there would be no impact on the Class 6 road right there. It would continue on. I mean, we drove all the way down it. It would not change people's ability to walk that. It doesn't change the nature of sort of the wilderness there. It is right next to another house. So I just think I get people's concern about the slippery slope issue, but I think when it's this fact specific, we can't extrapolate from this that's before us and say, oh, well, then obviously other people are going to do this. It's just not the case.
I mean, another point about the slippery slope is the last time this was discussed was on this road, the property just before it, and the town decided to convert the road to Class 5 to allow the building, which is weird to me. But then also a problem that I do have with this though, is I looked at a bunch of other towns' policies on this and how they structure it, and all of them are very similar. And all of them have a lot of requirements that are laid out that aren't, because we don't have a policy, we're not seeing that, right? Like they have requirements on detailed planning maps. They have requirements on also having an application to improve a small portion of the road, also having requirements for performance bonds to maintain that sort of stuff. So that's something that's not here, which makes me a little bit uncomfortable with not fully knowing how it will play out, not fully understanding how everything will be placed.
I think those are all really valid things to put into our policy. And I guess I don't see that as a reason to not go forward with this application. I don't think it's fair for us, in other words, to tell this applicant or other applicants, you know, we want you to withdraw your application or we're going to not deny it because we don't have a policy in place yet.
Yes, and I did see something that I don't know where it is exactly. There are, I believe we can grant the permit with other conditions on it. Isn't that right? I mean, there's a condition of having to waive liability, but I did see some concerns about, in fact, I think the planning board's comments might have said this, something about like increasing the intensity of the residential use, but it would, all the other restrictions would remain, and you cannot subdivide property on a class 6 road. So, I mean, I think that I agree with Stephen that I don't think it's fair. It's just not fair to sit here and say, well, because we don't have a policy in place, we can't grant this. I do think, however, this is showing us we need a policy. And I think whatever we sort of decide here, we will follow something similar and put it into an official policy.
Do we, I tried to figure this out, and I couldn't figure it out. Do we know how it became a class 6 road? Was it voted on or was it abandoned?
It was voted on
To become a class 6 road?
about 40 years ago. I think we discussed this in the very beginning. And then in 2012, that portion right next to us was upgraded, which is why we thought that that would be in the best interest of the town, which has led to our first meeting here. And we were going to pay for that out of our pocket. We went to town meeting and that was very upsetting to much of the population. So we decided to be as respectful as we could to the members of the community that voted in that way and did our research. And I've read that book. I've done the deep dive in 674, just like you did, and educated myself as much as possible. And yes, this was done on this road back in 2012 with the upgrade, but what we're requesting here today has been done as recently as 2018. I want to say Buzzell Corner, but I'm Buzzwell Corner, and then another road in the area as well that's escaping me at the moment. But so I know that, you know, slippery slope and precedent keeps being brought up, but it's already there. It's been done so many times, and we're not looking for the subdivision, or, you know, we're looking to put in our single family home. And despite the last 6 months, we have still tried to be as respectful and accommodating to the community as we can, because we just want to be a part of it. We just want to build our home and live there. We don't want to upset access to the rest of the road or anything like that. So it's just been a meeting after meeting, and I would have thought that there may have been a policy already with how many times it has happened, and we looked, and reading the road and the RSA considered, is it appropriate to approach the town about getting a policy going so that we can move forward in that regard? And this seemed like the most forward. Have you been out to the property?
Yeah, a couple times.
So you know that it's not far from where the class 5 ends. We want to put our driveway right near where that ends to make as a little impact on the rest of the road. And our home is going right, would go right in that spot. I'm very positive thinking, so I speak to it like it's going to happen, and eventually it will. But I just don't. I guess it's just been a long road. And
yeah. So
it was voted on originally. The reason it became a class 6 road was because it was voted on.
do we know? I thought might be it was like neglect for 5 years, which automatically converts it.
There were, I don't know, I can't remember which one this is.
So Jeff, and I heard you, I think, come off mute for a sec, so I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second. But I guess, in my opinion, it doesn't seem to really matter, because the part you're talking about is so close to the other houses in the class 5 road. And the one other point I was going to make in thinking about this RSA and its existence for this very purpose, if we didn't grant this building permit with this set of facts, I'd be curious to know what set of facts would we grant it? Because to me, it's very clear.
That was one of my big questions that I asked at the planning board. It's effectively, if we were to develop a policy and we weren't to apply it here, then when would we ever do it? And there wasn't a good answer, and there was a whole lot of discussion about it, but I think that's a really good question.
Jeff, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to comment that isn't the slippery slope later on the agenda tonight?
Oh, you're thinking of the, right. So there was this other petition so that was an actual petition to the select board. And we did discuss that the next step is to have yes, there has to be title work done for all the abutters. But it's a different.
This is a petition to the board too?
This is for a building permit under a totally different, this is under a different state statute. That is, I mean, I think it's just sort of a coincidental timing issue that they're completely separate and distinct. And that issue, like if our decision tonight has no bearing whatsoever on how that process moves forward and what the board decides to the extent we make decisions on that. They're just completely unrelated. That's the point I was trying to make at the beginning, is that I get how it's easy to sort of slip into that, like, oh, we're pulling the thread on Class 6 roads, but I just don't think that's the case. Entirely different processes, and the set of facts before us are so specific that I think it keeps it very narrow in terms of what we have to decide.
There's actually a house on that Class 6 road that uses the beginning as the driveway.
Oh.
On South Road.
Oh,
right?
on South Road. Yeah.
I would just add to that, and Jeff, I would just add that the end result is very different too. If the board says yes, the status of this road is not going to change. It's going to stay Class 6. But on the petition to layout for Old South Road, if we said yes to that, that would change the classification to Class 5 and open up development potentially and obligate the town to maintain and all those Class 5 sorts of things. But that's not this particular request that we're dealing with right now on the agenda.
Right. And just to emphasize the narrowness of this, again, this is from the Municipal Association book on roads. It says, the only authority the municipality has is to follow the statute and either grant or deny the building permit based on the facts at hand. So again, it's just, I know I'm a broken record here, but I just want to be very clear about what's before us.
So, I mean, there's another part of the statute that allows, I mean, if we deny it, it can go to the ZBA for appeal, right?
Correct.
So this is another thing that I run into, is that if this was to go to the ZBA for an appeal, and if I was on the ZBA going through all the requirements for a variance, it almost hits every single one perfectly. And a lot of times it's like you have a problem trying to find and figure out what exactly is a hardship. And like, this is the perfect definition of a hardship.
Yeah, and it goes back to that, the quote I read at the beginning, that towns can't just deny these permits because they want to preserve the land somehow. And I would also just remind everyone, like, the land doesn't like revert back to the town or something. I mean, it's owned by these folks. So I feel like there's sort of this notion that like the two decisions, either we grant it or like this land is conservation, but that's not the case.
And it's zoned residential.
It is, right, yeah, zoned residential.
Well, that's like an interesting, that's kind of why I was wondering if it was voted on or if it was just abandoned, because I mean, if it's voted on, then it's effectively the town saying like, we don't want someone to build here. But if it's just abandoned, it's just saying we don't want to plow it anymore. But what you're saying is that doesn't even matter, right? Like the town can't do zoning this way, can't stop development by changing everything to a Class 6 road. That's not a valid
That's what,
reason.
I mean, it
That's not a
seems
valid
like
reason to not have a building there.
that's my read of the statute and some of the guidance on it. And it doesn't mean that it's like the public safety issue, I think, has to be the driving issue for us. And to me, there's no clear public safety issue. In fact, we've had experts weigh in, and actually just seeing it myself, I mean, it's right there. It's right next to another house with a clear turnaround. So.
And the area was passable all winter long. There's somebody that lives all the way down to the end of the Class 6 and then up one of the trails that lives off grid that we've met. She's a wild lady. But she comes and goes all winter long, and that road's not maintained by any municipality.
So I did see a Supreme Court case where a denial, I think it was by a ZBA, was upheld, and it was that there was like a cliff and it was super rocky and it was going to be impossible for anyone to pass. And so I don't know if you've been out there, Ken, but it just, yeah, it just is not the case. It's easy to drive on, in fact. But again, I think another key issue is that granting a permit for this one lot for a single family home has no effect on the way that Class 6 road continues, as it would continue to be a Class 6 road out to the town borders. So I don't know if others want to make further
I thought I
board
heard
comments.
Jeff come off mute. I don't know if they-
Jeff, do you have more comments?
So is it our policy that you can't get a building permit on class 6 or is it state policy?
I missed what you said. Is it our policy that you cannot build on a Class 6 road? Is that what you said?
Yes.
So it's a state statute that, and it's a public safety issue. So it's because if you're out building in the middle of nowhere on a Class 6 road and fire can't get to you, that's a problem. So that's sort of like, I mean, I don't have the legislative history in front of me, but that seems to be sort of the root.
This used to be one of the few places that state statutes stepped into zoning. I think there are more now, there may be more coming, but this has been on the books a long time.
Okay, so if the board doesn't have any more comments at the moment and no more questions or comments for the Greenwoods, I think we can open up public comment on this issue. So if you want to, you don't have to stay there if you don't want. So if people would like to speak, and again, if you did email us, we got them and we did read them, so hopefully don't have to repeat what was already written to us, but I want to give people a chance to comment. Come on up.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Wilkie. My name is on the memo from the planning board. I'm the chair. I think one of the biggest concerns, and we had a very lengthy discussion, as Thomas can attest to, with a lot of issues that are really brought up and pros and cons towards a lot of it. We understand the select board's, right from which to be able to make a decision relative to this petition or a building permit. One of the concerns I think that addresses everybody is in fact the policy. Is in fact there's something in place, that's something that, the ordinance would have to be able to support it. We're not 100% sure our ordinances across the board apply to Class 6 lands. We would also from our end, require a review of that and the applicability as it may apply in the future to any Class 6 building. For example, if somebody wanted to put a duplex in there, we don't know that we have the ability from which to say yes or no, even in a restricted Class 4 area. So it's these types of questions that we really haven't gotten into. I don't know what was referenced for 2018. I've been on the planning board for 20 years, and I don't recall that. But the other concern that we have, there is a liability issue, and that's the town. And you can, as a property owner, you can say, okay, I'm going to take responsibility, but you take the responsibility for the traffic that occurs on a Class 6 road. And we would just suggest that, you check with council and also check with, your insurer, if in fact you have one, or your self-insured administrator relative to that. Consistency is important. And again, I think the development of a policy in this regard to protect the select board, to protect everybody involved is a wise thing to do. We felt that, again, it's probably going to take some ordinance changes. And ordinance changes obviously would have to have public hearings and would have to go to our town for a particular vote. The last thing associated with it was, of course, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, was in fact is the change of usage. What happens there? I mean, if all of a sudden this becomes a home business, is there going to be travel? What's going to happen to it? Those type of questions, I think, need to be addressed. whether in the approval process or whether that be, obviously that would something that we would hope it would be in the policy that would be, eventually developed. Another thing that came up, and it came up afterwards actually, and not part of this particular memo, is that at one point in time, there was a discussion, I think that came before, it's my understanding, it came before the select board, and I don't know the dates, but it was a move from which to be able to change some of the Class 6 roads into Class 8 trails. And
Excuse me for a second. Can you have Mike get close to the microphone, please?
sorry about that. I moved it over.
Oh,
Oh, Jeremy.
Have to speak louder than this.
oh, yeah.
And so I think, also, there maybe should be some initiative from which to say, okay, there are Class 6 roads out there that really can't be accessed, that would be inappropriate to access, or are used really primarily as trails today, whether it be for hiking, whether it be for biking, whether it be snowmobiling, whatever the particular recreational activity or personal activity that may be going on through there. So again, from the board's perspective, again, we recognize the select board's, ability from which to say yes or no. We're just, our cautions have been put forth and our comments, and we go from there.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, when you said you were concerned about the applicability of ordinances.
Yeah, we had some discussion with respect to what happens if somebody decides to put something that's not necessarily permitted in a particular, Class 6 lot. And we're not sure.
I would think that, I'm not.
We think we're okay, but we had a couple of questions that came up to sit there and say, we really need the opportunity from which to review it more closely.
Yeah, not being there for the conversation, I would think that the zoning ordinance still applies. And if you're not permitted to, turn it into a tire factory,
Is it still a Class 4? Is it still a Class 3? We could even answer that for 100% sure.
Why?
We felt it applied. We felt it still as a big classification would still hold. But we never contemplated, at least, the language didn't clearly contemplate that the Class 6 could in fact be there. So, again, we think we're okay. We think it's applicable. We just want the opportunity from which to be able to review it as a policy is developed to make sure that we do not have to create new ordinances that would support whatever policy that went into play, or also to make sure that none of the ordinances would in fact be contradicted as a result of a decision on a Class 6 property.
Yeah. I think we've heard a lot tonight about what would make a good policy.
And there's a lot of things, and I think, has access to a lot of them. There are a lot of different towns that have it and positions. So with that.
Yeah, and I think on a policy, that actually would not be a town ordinance. It would just be a town policy. So.
Right, because the select board has the authority of roads.
Right. We just would want to make sure that it didn't contradict.
Yeah.
An ordinance that's in play that time.
Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to know too, the waiver that we've used in the past, kind of the standard waiver, issues a building permit for a single family home, nothing beyond that. So that is in the sign things.
Okay.
And
Right.
the state law, if we were to grant them this permit and they wanted to then make some enlargement of the building and needed to pull an additional permit, building permit that is, they'd have to come back.
And if they were open to business, they would have to obviously come forth to the planning board and demonstrate that they meet the ordinances
And I would presume, if they change the use, they need site plan review.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I will just say, just because I have it in front of me, the municipal association in this, I found some slides on this issue. They do say there's no requirement that municipalities adopt townwide policies. We can examine these on a case-by-case basis. And if we do adopt policy, you can still allow construction only in some areas, but not others. So we can really, I don't think it's crazy that we don't have a policy. I think it would be helpful. that we have, if we have a policy moving forward, but I just wanted to make that note that,
We talked some about that too, and what it does do, we think protects the select board from, favoritism, accusations, that type of deal, so that there's a consistent application to the review of a petition to allow a building permit.
Mhm. Yes, I think consistency is key.
Okay.
Thank you. Anyone else want to make comments? Bonnie?
I'm Bonnie Christie, 302 Smithfield Road. I'm on the Conservation Commission. Sabrina, could you read that piece one more time about what could be considered a taking? What situation?
Yes.
Excuse me, can you have it get close to the microphone, please?
Okay, so,
Do you want to put that over there?
oh yeah, we can.
Hi, Jeff.
Well,
We could yell.
all right, so Jeff, Bonnie Christie's here. She asked me to reread the quote that I read from this, the municipal association. The municipal association has a book on New Hampshire laws related to roads and highways and such. So I read this quote. If a town's true motive for denying permission to build on a lot under RSA 674-41 relates to something other than the adequacy of the road, for example, because it wants the land to remain wild as some sort of preserve, then such a denial is indeed quite likely to constitute a taking. Then I read, this law provides a way to regulate road access adequacy and is not a backdoor way of regulating or preventing development itself. So that was the quote.
Okay, thank you. So two things. Regarding the slippery slope, I think it's clear that we're on it because I think Steve referred to it. Did I hear you say that we've already done this before?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's
So-
not my reason for granting it, but we have already.
No, but it's being said
Yeah.
in a select board meeting and it's in the context of making the decision. Well, we've already done it, so.
It's also been denied before though.
Yeah.
Okay, but we have already done it before. So I think we are on the slippery slope and the property, did you say that the property next door to this one was given a waiver? What?
That it was voted on at town meeting to, the same vote that happened this town meeting happened to the property next door at a previous town meeting and it was approved
Okay,
To convert.
to convert the road.
Classified portion
Yeah.
goes up to the beginning of this property.
so something that I bring up at the Conservation Commission, which may or may not help you in this situation, because I understand you have a narrow scope here that you can consider this under. But, as we make our decisions about how the town grows and develops by narrow statutes and ordinances and case law, what I see when I go around town is Hopkinton is changing and diminishing, death by 1,000 cuts. It's never one big thing. It's like every little driveway, a couple of driveways were paved just down the street from where I live. There's nothing against the law about that. But what happens when those driveways are blacktopped is all the runoff goes off of them right into the storm drain and right into the Kentucky River. It's legal. There's nothing against it. Everybody can do it. Everybody does do it. It's polluting the river. It's death by 1,000 cuts. If we simply say, okay, if land is conserved, then it's open space. If it's not conserved, it's game on, develop it to the maximum that our ordinances, regulations, and RSAs let us. Then we end up with everything developed to the max, everything legal, everything permitted, and then these carved out open spaces. And that can be our future if that's what we want. I like to think of a transition. I mean, I look at what's happening across from where you live. That looks very different to me now. There's nothing illegal about the Barnard property being carved up into 4 lots, but look at all the trees that have been cut, and it's been cut way down near the wetland, which is down there, which is such a huge, important area. Everything's legal, everything's above board, everything's permitted. it's a big change for that section of the road. I see the same thing on Gould Hill and along, where the big cut happened, I guess, for a view last year. I mean, it's majorly changing the town. So I think you do need a policy. I'm not sure if you already make these decisions, how these decisions are going to factor into your policy and what kind of policy you're thinking about. But I do think that you need to think about this death by 1,000 cuts thing. And regarding a taking, I don't think that there would be any case for a taking here. I disagree not with what it says in the handbook or the way you read it, but I think that's not the issue here. We're not trying to some backdoor way keeping this land wild or making a preserve or something. It's about the roads. The Class 6 roads are very special rights of way. It's not what's on either side so much. It's the road and what it feels like to go down that road. And there's a lot of language in the master plan, and I think in the road less traveled, about why Class 6 roads are so important and so treasured by towns, because they're different than trails. They're these quiet, leafy, areas, and you get a different feel when you walk down a Class 6 road.
And do you think that that argument still applies, even though this road will remain Class 6, even if this is approved?
Well, it's the 1,000 cuts, a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And pretty soon the Class 6 road doesn't feel like Class 6 road anymore. I mean, don't look left, don't look right, just look straight ahead, and then you'll still feel like you're on a Class 6 road. But pretty soon you look around and say, holy cow, what happened? Holy cow, what happened here? This really feels different now. I'm just giving you my, I don't want to argue with you. That's how I feel about it.
I think one of a really important thing that Mike brought up is the fact of the class A trails. I mean, if these are areas that we want to keep in the same condition that they're in, a Class 6 road isn't the appropriate use for that. A Class A trail is the appropriate use for that. And so that's one of the questions is if we don't allow building on this, then we're effectively saying this lot should never be built on, and this should be a Class A trail. And I don't know if that's a good answer. I don't know if I would say that this should be a Class A trail.
I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying about we're now saying it should be a Class A trail.
Well, if we're saying we want to maintain the state that Class 6 road is in, then really a better form to do that in is to make it a Class A trail, because then we can maintain it in the exact state that it's in now. And so if we're to deny this, then we're effectively saying there's no reason to ever put anything on this piece of land. And so I would then argue that we should make that, instead of being a Class 6 road, we should make it a Class A trail.
So Class A trails are something that you think are an option that the town should start thinking about.
That is one of the things in the master plan, actually.
Yeah.
I think that in the same way that we need a policy for how to deal with Class 6 roads, we should be looking at all the Class 6 roads that don't make sense to ever put development on and talk about converting them to Class A trails. Like if the purpose is to not have them as roads, then we should be having them as trails so that we can use them as trails. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, okay, go ahead.
I just want to make one comment, Bonnie. The master plan, I printed the relevant pages. It specifically says the town defers to this statute that I've been citing regarding building on a Class 6 road. And so it does contemplate the fact that houses might be built on a Class 6 road where it's appropriate. And I just think I get what you're saying. And it's a tough thing because when people own land, you can't deny them the right to use it for arbitrary or unreasonable reasons. And we can't just sit here as the governing body and say, well, we don't like it, so we're not going to grant it. It's just not how it works. We have to be fair.
You're saying that.
Okay, well, I'm just being clear that we have a process we have to follow and we have to be fair about it. And so I hear what you're saying. I just don't know it's not like we can sit here and say we have the discretion to just say no, because we don't.
I'm not suggesting that. I hope not. Yeah.
Okay.
The Class 6 ALs is Class A trails is a really good thing to sort of think about, because the state statute, doesn't apply to Class A trails. So we wouldn't find ourselves in a situation if we had a stretch of former road that was now Class A trail, where somebody could come in here, submit an application, and potentially pull a building permit.
And that is in the master plan under Class 6 roads, talking about, where it makes sense to turn them into trails. So,
And that's a town meeting vote.
To me,
To create a Class A trail. So it'd be something the whole town would get to vote on.
to me, that's the best way to avoid this, the slippery slope is to take the resources that we have that we want to maintain in the way that we want them and convert them into a way to do that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you guys are thinking that way and talking about it, because when we had the problem on Crossroad, I brought that up and I was like, no, can't do any Class A trails. That was like a big hot potato. And it came up at our last Conservation Commission meeting when we were talking about this Class 6 road problem. And we talked about Class A trails. And I think it's a conversation that we should pursue in this town and start thinking about that.
so, yeah. All right. Thank you, Bonnie. Did you want to speak?
I just want to make the point that my property starts at the beginning of Class 6 road and ends at the end of Class 6 road. So if you grant this, you build in one spot, we're not going to destroy any part of the Class 6 road that you're talking about, or upgrade any.
Right, the road.
All the way down.
The road would continue to be Class 6,
Exactly the way
right?
it is. And it has nothing to do with that building, destroying the road.
Right.
Be on the property all the way down. So even if it was a slippery slope, we'll be able to come in and build on that road. Anyways, unless it was across the street or across the Class 6 road.
And they wouldn't be able to if it's in Hopkinton, because we would have to grant a building permit.
Right. Sorry, we can, do you want to keep going?
No, you go ahead, Thomas.
This is, so if we were to have a policy, it would likely be very similar to all the other existing policies. And all the other existing policies actually require you to change the portion of the road, to upgrade the portion of the road for emergency vehicles. So that's one of the issues that I have, is that like we don't have a way to do that. But like, in this case, the police and fire both said they don't really have a problem. And it is right on the end. So like I get that. But the flip side of that is, like, all these other policies require the applicant to upgrade the road. And in this case, we've had a very specific town meeting say we do not want any changes to the road. And so in this case, we might need the opposite of a very specific addition saying you absolutely cannot touch the road.
So that would be part of our policy.
Well, not part of our policy, because I actually think that's probably a proper portion of a policy, but I'm saying in this very specific case.
Right, that the road has to stay.
The road has to stay not improved.
No one can do any work on a Class 6 road without written permission from the select board.
Right.
So that is
Right.
always required.
Right. Well, I'm saying like the other policies, it's like a dual application. Like you need to have both at the same time in order for it to be approved. But in this case, it's like the opposite. We specifically don't want that to happen.
I think, Brittany talked about if the facts were different, it'd be a very different conversation. I think if you didn't change, everything was the same, but you made the condition of the road really poor, and DPW and the fire department and the police said, we have real concerns about being able to reach this property. I think under those circumstances, we could make as a condition of our approval, you need to do X, Y, and Z to make the road passable. But, those aren't the facts for this applicant. And so the road is in a state that is, acceptable to them. And so we have no need to sort of require them to upgrade it.
I think the gentleman behind you had his hand.
If the applicant, you said they're going to sign a waiver for liability, if they were to turn around and to sell that home, is that something that's in the deed, that waiver? It is. So that would be deed, so it would be forever.
It's recorded in the registry, so it's in the chain of title.
Yeah. Good question.
Require that insurance as part of their ownership to cover their liability?
That's up to them.
So it's an insurance company, so I'm sure we'll have insurance.
Did you want to?
I just had a quick question, Sabrina. Did I hear you say that there's a statute that does not, makes it, you can't subdivide on a Class 6 road, a piece of property?
I believe that is in the state law that you can't subdivide. Or it's our zoning. Okay.
Is that our zoning? Oh, okay. Because my thing is, it's a pretty big piece of property, so theoretically, it could be further developed. But if you can't subdivide.
Okay, so that is in our own, okay, yeah, so our town does not allow that.
So you couldn't subdivide it, divide it. It's also in the warranty deed that it has to be a single family residence.
Mhm.
So that also solves that.
Does anybody online want to comment? All right, any other comments from the crowd? Mr. Wells?
Bob Wells, 174 Moran Road. Having chaired the previous development activities of the town, I guess I am somewhat shocked that we do not have a policy that forbids any construction on a Class 6 road. I would have sworn until this meeting that that was the case, and that in Hopkinton you could not, and that has been consistent with our master plans back when I chaired it perhaps 20 years ago, some time ago. So I think post haste, this board needs to adopt a policy that forbids any construction on a Class 6 road so that we have a policy that will preclude that. And to discuss having to go to town meeting to have all Class 6 roads that people think that they want to have into trails, those will not pass. And we're opening our entire community to develop it. Those will not pass because I think a majority of people are going to come out against having that kind of restriction on their Class 6 road. If we cannot protect our Class 6 roads, we're blowing in the wind and our town will be forever changed with the kinds of vote you're talking about tonight. I don't know what your prior votes were and why you did it. To me, that perhaps was an error, perhaps was a mistake, but we're now down to where I am hearing that anytime anyone wants to build a house on a Class 6 road, which happens to be adjacent to another house, which is not on a Class 6 road, you think you have to grant it. I think in most instances, Class 6 roads begin close to a house. And so you are really opening up this entire town for Class 6 roads, people purchasing property at a depressed price because it's on a Class 6 road, coming in, asking for an exception, building a house, perhaps flipping it for a profit. I think we are in very dangerous territory until you develop that policy. And I am chagrined to hear this discussion tonight going contrary to what was voted on at town meeting. And I recognize town meeting does not control this, but town meeting certainly said and expressed its feelings. So I would ask you to develop a policy post haste. I think we are messing around with our town in a manner which I don't think you fully appreciate. Maybe because you're so young, except for you. But I think it's time to act. And I think turning Class 6 roads into trails is not, it perhaps is a way to go, but I think we're opening up a lot of Class 6 roads to development exactly because those trails will not pass.
I guess I would just ask you, Bob, what do you make of our master plan specifically referring to the state statute that allows for building on Class 6 roads where it's appropriate?
I guess they didn't understand the statute. That's my guess, because I think it was always thought in this town you could not build on a Class 6 road. We're now hearing that you've allowed it. And
in limited circumstances where the facts supported it, because again, it's not our fault that the state legislature created the statute that orders the governing body to be fair about granting building permits and specifically saying that we cannot deny them as a backdoor way of preventing development. So I think this town has to come up with a different way to protect roads, Class 6 roads then, because
what you're allowing is people to buy a lot for a very depressed price, coming in and asking permission to now construct a house where they did not pay for fair market value for that lot once it has been developed into a house. Now we have a house on a lot which can be sold for full value, regardless of what the initial price was paid for the underlying lot.
Well, okay,
So I think from a policy perspective,
it has a deed restriction, so it can't be sold for what it could be sold without the deed restriction. It's not a class 5 road. It is a different case, but what if this was the original property owner that owned this land back in the 1800s? Would you then say that in this case, we should allow the building permit? It's that same person, they've owned it for 150 years. We neglected the road, it turns into a class 6, and now this person wants to build a house. In that case, should we allow it?
I don't know that it was abandoned, and I think that's a critical question.
Yeah.
And I guess one other question I'm posing, it's sort of rhetorical, is just under what set of facts would we ever grant a building permit then? Because this specifically says that governing bodies have to go through this process.
I think you're saying is we
Depends on your policy.
I think you're saying we wouldn't, which if
Then
that's,
we will get sued because people will say
Let
that it's
them sue.
unfair and it's a taking.
Let them sue.
I want to focus on the word taking. When somebody buys for a price below market because it's a non-buildable lot, is there an argument for a taking if it's then ruled a non-buildable lot?
Well, there's no taking. They own the lot for the depressed price.
So then the word taking in the road less traveled is sort of meaningless.
No, I don't. And actually, again, back to the NHMA guidance, it specifically says the boards like us are not supposed to be debating what the property owner's rights are or whether it's a taking. I was making that point to show, like, you know, the narrowness of what's before us, that we shouldn't be actually debating that. In fact, it's really an up or down question about the public safety issues related to the road right there. And so I keep coming back to this public safety issue, because if there is no public safety issue, on what grounds would we deny this building permit? That's the question. There are no grounds.
If you have a policy, so one could put a house at the beginning of every class 6 road today, based upon your judgment, as I'm hearing.
well,
Potentially.
Potentially,
Every situation is a little bit different, though.
if the class 6 road is as drivable as this one, there are lots of class 6 roads that are not even close to this.
Yeah.
In town. The one right off South Road is a perfect example.
I'm just saying, we have a bad policy, and I have great fears for where this is leading. And I think the first thing you need to do is to develop the strongest policy possible to prevent building on class 6 roads, because there will be an excuse for everyone to purchase a lot of land on a class 6 road next to a house, which is already there because that's the way it is, come to you and ask for permission to do it. So
And
anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. I just want you to know my view.
Can I ask one more question? Because you have a very strong conviction that converting to class A trails won't work. And you also have in very long institutional knowledge of those types of votes and how they happen at town meeting. But at this town meeting, it was voted to conserve the road, effectively to keep it as what a class A trail would be. So what other issues do you see that people would have with converting to class A? Like, do you think if this vote at town meeting was to convert that road to class A, do you think it would have failed or passed?
I have no idea. I think it's a new concept that people don't understand.
Yeah.
I certainly don't.
Okay.
Well, I would just come back to the fact that this RSA is not supposed to be a backdoor way to limit development in a way that's unfair or unreasonable. And so I just don't think it's fair to characterize us as like willy-nilly or, you know, not being old enough to understand the stakes. I just don't think that's fair, because if we don't have grounds to deny a building permit, it's wrong for us to deny it. And then they could appeal to the ZBA, and then we're going to court. That is not, we are looking out for the best interests of this town. The best interest of this town is not to say, well, let's ignore state law because we don't like it and we don't want anyone building here. I mean, it's just, that's unreasonable. We're here to protect Hopkinton. This is the correct interpretation of a state law. We have no grounds to deny a building permit here. And I'm sorry, people don't like that, but I don't know what else we're supposed to do. So,
Well, develop a policy so it doesn't happen again.
well, then maybe the conservation groups in town should look into buying, this land was for sale. The Conservation Commission could have purchased it if it was so important. It's true, so,
Anyway, you have my views.
thank you.
I would like to respectfully request that at the beginning of the meeting, you said this wasn't open to public comment, and while I appreciate everyone wanting to say their piece, we've gotten long far off the point of this meeting, and we're talking about making policies and upgrading roads, and I would like to get back to the matter at hand.
I appreciate that. I do think it's relevant to talk about some of these issues, especially with respect to developing a policy moving forward. So yes, I said that we have something narrow before us, knowing full well people probably would like to comment on other issues, but yeah, okay. Would you like to comment?
Thank you. I'm Celeste Hemmingson. I am the vice chair of the planning board. I have two comments to make. The first is an attempt to answer the question asked by Mr. Lipoma to Bob Wells about why Bob felt that a conversion to Class A trails would not pass in the town. And Tom, you asked him why that might be. The reason that might be the case is exactly because of the conversation that we are having here right now. People that have property on Class 6 roads or would like to buy property at the cheap on Class 6 roads would see that if they were all made into Class A trails, they would not be able to come before the Board of Selectmen and ask for an ad hoc permission to build a house on them. So that's the first comment I want to make. The second comment I'd like to make is to go on the record to be questioning, Mrs. Dunlop, your interpretation of the RSA as being narrowly focused on public safety. I'm just questioning that because if that were the case, why was the planning board specifically and by law asked to comment on your request about this? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think the planning board component is because there's also language in the case law about not having scattered and premature development. And I think that's where the planning board's input comes in, is that component of it.
And I think I forgot about that language earlier. Thank you for reminding me. I think that actually gets at a lot of the concern that Bob and others have raised about everyone just like buying up lots on a Class 6 road, because another fact here that I think is relevant is that it's not some pristine, untouched road. There's lots of, well, not lots, there's houses out there though. There's quite a few in a row. And so I do think if facts were before us where it was a stretch of road, if there was no public safety issue, but there was no other development, those are different facts. And I do think in that case, the language about preventing scattered or like random development comes into play. I didn't bring that up earlier because I don't think this is scattered or random. Would you like to speak?
First, I do have to question your comment that there are other houses there. There's one house, and then next to that is a cabin that hasn't been used for a long time, owned by the abutter to the property in question. And the only other place there is a hunting cabin that's actually in Henniker. So as far as Hopkinton goes.
Sorry, but coming from Boundary going out of town, there was at least one other house prior to there would be neighbors. I guess
There's
your
one
house.
No.
Well, my house is quite a ways down before that. And then there's the Kentucky Precinct water tank and treatment facility.
Then there's another house.
Then there's one house.
For the turnaround.
Yes.
And then there's a fire hydrant, and then it goes up a little bump where it clearly transitions into the Class 6.
Right, okay, so my memory was that there was a house, you go around a corner, and then there would be the would-be neighbor's house plus a cabin.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know what corner you mean, but there's
Okay,
basically one house that's inhabited, and then there's a hunting cabin in Henniker.
but my point was more in general, when you're driving down Boundary, it's not like there's 0 houses on it. There's quite a few houses on that road.
Yes, well, from
Class 6 part,
not
On Boundary,
yeah, on the
Right.
class 5 part.
well, the section from the intersection with Pleasant Pond Road, there are very few houses. It's a pretty long stretch. From that intersection up to the end of the road, the end of the class 6, we're the only house on the left-hand side of the road. So it's very sparsely populated up there, but I just wanted to point out that there's really just one inhabited house near the class 6 section. With regard to safety, I do have a couple of, well, one point and one question. The road, the class 6 section of the road can be variable. Some years back during mud season, there was an older couple who owned the hunting cabin, or their son owned it, I think, and they were up visiting. And he had a pretty substantial truck, I think, and the poor old woman walked up all the way back to my house and asked for help because they were completely mired in the mud. And she was concerned for his heart because he was trying to get it out and it was a terrible situation. And Scott went and got them out with a winch. So the road is not always passable depending upon the season and the weather. And the other question I would have with regard to safety, and I don't know this for a fact right now, my sons are older, but when they were in school, the rule was that the school bus had to pick up and drop off any children in kindergarten at the door, not at a stop somewhere else down the road. And I'm just wondering about how that would work.
My children are dropped off every day and go to Maple Street School for the Boys and Girls Club, in which I pick them up afterwards. So the bus is not.
Jeff, are you trying to?
I would just note they're actually.
I just can't hear when people aren't near the microphone.
Okay, sorry about that. Go ahead, Neil.
The agreement we've used in the past includes that the property owner is responsible for transporting any children to the nearest school bus stop.
So Jeff, so you could hear that Neil was making the point because concern was brought up about school buses. And Neil said the waiver that is signed says the families or whoever lives there is responsible for dealing with school issues so that the bus doesn't have to go down a portion of the road. Would be
I can hear Neil when he speaks.
Okay.
I can't hear the public. because
Okay.
they're not near the microphone, and most of them haven't identified themselves either for the record.
Could you say your names?
I'm sorry, Catherine Mitchell, 1677 Boundtree Road.
And we had Celeste Hemingway before that and Bob Wells.
Johnson.
I'm sorry, Hemmingson, and Bob Wells before that, and Bonnie was before that.
Mike Wilkie.
Oh, yes, Mike was first.
And I guess the last point I would make would be with regard to it being a taking. I had read of a court case in New Hampshire, in Lebanon, I believe, where they ruled that it was not a taking. So there are times that it's clearly not a taking. And from a logical perspective, it seems that if you buy something knowing that the listing says recreational and under restrictions, it says development and building, that you can't take from someone what they never actually had because it was actually sold as a non-buildable lot. And that was sort of the town policy. So that's all I wanted to comment.
Again, the property is for residential.
Hi, Mark. Will you try to talk loudly and say your name?
Hi, Mark Zankel, 485 Crowell Road. So I don't really want to talk about this particular proposal in front of you because you've made it clear what your interpretation of the statute is and that you're going to vote on it tonight. It's fine. I do just want to really urge the select board to commit to developing this policy. What? To commit to developing this policy that you've been talking about. I think in my mind, there is, rightly or wrongly, there's an assumption that people in our community have about what can and can't be done in Class 6 roads. And so in the absence of that policy, it makes it really hard, I think, if you live on a Class 6 road, if you're a neighbor to one of these properties, to have any sense of what might happen out there over time. It does feel very ad hoc, and it's not to critique the decision you're going to make tonight or the decisions have been made in the past. It just feels very ad hoc if you don't have a policy. And even I'll just observe, I don't have a dog in this fight. I just care about the town. Listening to how you all have described your perceptions of this road tonight feels very subjective. How much development on a road is enough to make it not feel scattered? That feels pretty subjective based on what I've been hearing. How good does a road have to be for it to feel like, in your eyes, that it's not a safety issue? I don't know. So, just listening to you all talk, to me, that puts you in a very difficult position of having to make decisions that can feel fairly subjective. So I just want to strongly urge you to commit to developing that policy. So in the future, you're not put in that position. Neighbors have more clarity about what may or may not happen in the future. And the town can then think, in light of that policy, think about whether the town wants to take other actions around these places. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I would be curious to know if towns do have blanket prohibitions on building on Class 6 roads, because I would question whether we can do that, given that people, I think, have a right to at least petition or apply for a building permit before the governing body. And again, we then have to use this as the process. And so my sense is that the state of New Hampshire, created this statute not as a way for towns to block development on Class 6 roads, but if towns want to otherwise preserve or limit building on Class 6 roads, I wasn't trying to be like coy about it. I do think it's true that we have groups in town specifically charged with dealing with conservation. And so if there are pieces of land that should be in conservation, we have other ways of conserving them. And I think it's clear that like this path and trying to do blanket prohibitions is probably not something we can do. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm not aware of any municipalities having that, and the statute even says this section 67441 shall supersede any less stringent local ordinance, code, or regulation, and no existing lot or tract of land shall be exempted from the provisions of this section except in accordance with the procedures expressly set forth in this section. So I think the goal of the legislature was to have this statute be the baseline everywhere in the state.
Steve, you said less stringent?
Yeah.
So would the.
Don't you mean then?
So if I just heard you, if I heard you correctly, Stephen, anybody who can see another house from their Class 6 property can get a building permit.
Not
No,
necessarily.
no.
Well, if the police and fire can get there, we don't have a basis to turn them down.
Right, but
Is
there's,
that right?
right, but there's lots of Class 6 roads that police and fire can never get to that
Yeah.
still have access.
And I think the part that Stephen just read, it's an and no existing lot or tract of land shall be exempted from the provisions of this section.
My point is a blanket prohibition on development is, I think, very problematic and likely to result in a lawsuit that we may well lose.
But developing a policy isn't going to help us either.
I think it
Well-
will, because to Mark's and other people's
I mean,
point, it provides, it allows us to have consistency, which we strive for, and a fair way of assessing these very fact-specific cases that come before us.
So I would argue.
Hold on, Jeff.
Fred,
1 second. Thomas, you guys are talking over each other. Thomas is talking.
Like, Jeff, I agree with you. I think if we're to have a policy on on how to vote on Class 6 roads, that policy should be ways not to blanket deny them, but then we should take all the resources that we have that we don't want to be built on, and those should be transferred into ways that are not Class 6 roads. Because we could have a policy that just says you can't build on Class 6 roads, But at the end of the day, we're still taking a vote. We don't have to, I mean, that's our policy, but we're still voting. We can vote however we want. So like a blanket policy is still just going to be at the whim of whatever. So like, if we want to conserve these resources in the condition that they're in, we should do that.
That was what the point I was trying to make, is like, there's other ways
Right.
that have been contemplated for towns to preserve land or prevent development. And I just don't think this is the correct path to do that. Well, it's not that I don't think that. I think it's very clear in the statute that that's the case. Jeff, were you going to say something?
Yeah, what Stephen just read said that a local policy.
That was gonna be good.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, we lost you. Jeff? Jeff, are you there?
I am, can you hear me?
Now we can. We lost you right as you were about to make your point.
What Stephen just read said that the RSA supersedes any local policy. So it's not going to help us.
No, any less stringent local ordinance, code, or regulation. And so I think that that's getting at, you can't just, abandon all rules and say, well, anyone can build on a class 6 road, because there are serious public safety concerns and concerns around the random, whatever the language is about, like scattered and premature housing. So the point of the statute, that language of the statute, is to say that towns have to follow this, that we can't just willy-nilly say, yes, you can build on a class 6 road. That's what that line is saying. This supersedes a town's attempt to be way more lax about the policies of building on class 6 roads.
But what policy could we develop that would be more stringent than the RSA?
Convert them to class A trails. I think like Town Road is a perfect example. There's a house right at the beginning of the town road that's on a class 6 road. And you, within eyesight, the class 6 road completely devolves into something that is not traversable by a vehicle. And like, that's clearly a case where that is a trail. It's part of the greenway. Like, that's clearly something that should be transferred into a class A trail so that it's not coming through a policy. That's my thought.
Conversion to a class A trail seems to me to be more of a taking.
Right, but I mean, that's effectively what the town vote was, is that we didn't want to convert that. We didn't want that road to be a road anymore. And it was more or less 50-50, but it went in the way of, we're not going to convert this to a class 5 road. And like, that's effectively what that vote was, is that we want to make that road not really a road anymore. So why not just make that a class A trail? In all these other issues where we're looking at whether or not it could or couldn't go, or whether or not it wouldn't fit the policy, if what we want to do is conserve them, we should conserve them.
Yeah, I agree. All right, we offered this to anyone online. Yes. Make sure you speak loudly and say your name.
Oh, I've never had a problem speaking loudly. Well, I appreciate the
Your
board.
name.
I am Scott Clay. I am at 1677 Boundtree Road. And after living there for 40 years, I have walked the woods and the road many times. And I do have a concern that I think the board should take into consideration about this land in particular. And since we are talking about a particular case, there's a large amount of wetland on this property, behind the property, the adjacent property. And I believe that there is a boundary dispute with the immediate abutter. So as far as trying to site a house and determine whether or not it's appropriate to build one on this property, I feel that this board should not make a decision tonight, and that instead a plan should be prepared that resolves the boundary dispute, resolves the potential wetland impact, shows that where a house can be sited and meet all of the zoning requirements and other considerations. Because if the board just goes ahead and rubber stamps this, it's basically passing the ball over to the planning board to deal with it, because ultimately there's going to have to be a plan submitted. And plans require known boundaries. And the boundary is disputed. I've talked directly with the abutter. And there's no doubt about it. There are 2 pins in the corner that's adjacent to the Greenwood lot that cannot be explained. And
That's for the planning board to, that is not before us.
you can't issue a building permit.
Then that's for the
You
party.
can't issue a building permit if there's no place to build a house. That's just common sense. And that's what this board seems to be poised to do.
Allowing building on a class 6 road in no way waives any of the other building requirements.
Understood, but what is the point of allowing building on a class 6 road on a particular location when there's no way to meet all of the requirements to build the house there? That's my concern, and I don't see that there's any downside to insisting that this applicant produce a plan before you make your decision, a plan that resolves the boundary dispute with the abutter, which has been communicated to you folks
Not for us to
previously.
decide, though. That's not for us to decide.
I'm hearing disagreement with that.
Private property owner dispute.
What is the pressure the board feels to approve this, given that there are a lot of unknowns about this property? There is a clear boundary dispute, so it's not even clear that the house can be sited where I've heard the board say over and over, it's right next to an existing house. Well, maybe not. Maybe it can't be built there. Maybe it's going to have to be built halfway to the boundary.
They'll discover that when they try, as Neil said, every other rule and restriction applies.
So this board would support building this house all the way up at the boundary, if that's the only place that you could site it and meet the various zoning requirements.
No, because then you have a public safety issue.
Well, I mean, depends on where the driveway is.
The planning board would not typically see a plan with respect to a single, house being constructed on a piece of property. We'd have to obviously follow the ordinances relative to the appropriate setbacks. We would have to get septic approval, et cetera. So the actual issuance of a building permit without a plan, to me, is kind of strange, but they just can't build on it until they get the appropriate permits. And check relative to layouts, as far as upland, so that you don't impact the wetlands, where the driveway was going to.
Please have him move to the microphone.
In the past, in the few times that it's come before, the few times that over the years that I've been involved, that it has come before planning board, we've at least had some sort of plan that we can look at. It doesn't have to be as totally detailed with everything, but the point is that I don't know what you're looking at. We didn't know what you were looking at relative. Where's the driveway? Is it right on the border? Is it up front 50 feet? Are there trees that have to be taken down to bring a cement mixer in to lay a foundation? All those questions we couldn't answer, and not necessarily appropriate for us to answer, but they were questions that excuse me. But there are questions that we raised relative to what are we looking at here?
Well, I think that we're getting a little off course here because, thank you, Mike. In the normal course, a property owner, thank you for making your comments. You buy property and get a building permit, and then you have to follow all the other rules that apply to building a home. And so that's what would happen here. So it's not like, I think we're getting a little off course. Those issues are not before us. A boundary dispute is certainly between private property owners. It's not something we would get involved with. Neil, am I correct in that? Yeah. So.
But there would have to be a limitation on where the driveway is, because that's like one of the crux of it. I mean, if the plan was to put a driveway at the end of the boundary, I don't even think this would be a question. Like, there's no way a fire truck can drive all the way down to the end of that. So that certainly needs to be a part of it. But
and it was, we met with the road agent who came out to the property and discussed with our contractor where the driveway is proposed to be. And we've also had our septic plan done and a survey, so there is no boundary dispute.
Okay.
I would move that we call the question.
Yeah.
I think
Oh, sorry.
I'm Bob Bradfield. I'm on 72 Petdale Road. What's Jeff's last name, by the way? He didn't identify.
Jeff Donahoe is a select board member.
Donnie, okay. I had a question does this applicant own the land on both sides of the road where they're going to be building?
No.
Okay. Because the way I read RSA 674, in granting this applicant's application, you will be also granting the right to the landowner on the other side to build on their property.
What?
So under RSA 674, what was it, C?
I referred to 674-41.
674-41, right, 674-41.
I guess I don't want to get in if I don't know who owns the other side of the road. But we don't have like a hypothetical petition before us. And
Right.
so
They have class 5 frontage too.
they have class 500 frontage.
They have class 5 frontage?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to make that point because it's clear under the statute, if you grant this under 674-41, then you're granting it for however long up the road
No,
on both
that's-
sides.
that's
'Cause
not-
it's a section of the road.
No, it's
Not
specific,
a lot-
no,
lot
it's
by
specific
plot.
to this landowner, specific to that lot, specific to these facts before us. And so I don't want to,
We own all the way down to the end of the roads, and we are not allowed to subdivide because it's class 6, so that alleviates all of that.
Okay, that was my point that I was gonna make. It's 674-41.
yeah, that's what I,
If
okay,
it's a class 6 highway, and
So-
the local governing board being you,
right.
and this also addresses the point that Celeste made about why the planning board would be even asked for their opinion. 674-41 requires you
Right.
to act after input from the planning board.
Right. And
Just what we've done.
The other point I want to make is that I think you've misinterpreted 674, Steve and Sabrina, in that it talks about the statute not being able to be trumped by any regulation or local ordinance that's less stringent. But if you were to have a blanket, no building on class 6 roads, that's more stringent. And so that would trump the
I
statute.
think we'd have to ask legal counsel because there's another line that says no land would be exempt.
Any property. You can't exempt any property.
Under what, 674?
Yeah, it's in that.
Reading that
just keep reading it.
That's in.
I think we would have to ask, if we have the authority to make a blanket rule about class 6 roads, that is something we will consider. I'm not sure that we have the authority to do that.
Yeah, I read the statute that you do, but. I think
Okay.
it's your time.
Thank you for your comments. And I do just want to emphasize again that a decision on this specific case has no bearing whatsoever on anyone else who would come to us and ask for a building permit. We have had examples in the past. They're a handful. And we're not making a decision tonight based on those. I think those were given as.
The last time this happened, it was allowed. So if this has bearing on future ones, then we should be looking at the last one to make the decision on this one.
And we're not.
And we're not.
We're not. I don't know the facts of those prior cases. They have no bearing on what's before us right now. So, okay, I think we can call the question here.
Well, I'm curious what the question is.
I think it's whether or not we
Do we
grant.
grant the request?
Right, but I mean, I think if we're going to, there should be restrictions. I mean,
Yeah, so we have the,
You have a sample.
yes, we have the sample waiver of liability. Are there other conditions you would want to add?
sorry, I'm pulling it up. Do you have it? Do you have it right there or no? See it. My biggest concern is making sure the road doesn't change and making sure the driveway is within an area of where it goes.
I mean, it does say you have to comply with the town's driveway regulations.
So you need a driveway permit,
Yeah.
But that driveway could be halfway up the road.
not if we don't grant it.
So who grants it?
DPW.
DPW, okay.
And no work can be done in class 6 roads without written permission from the board, so.
Right.
So while you're looking at that, I just want to summarize this journey. I think I've said this before, but I don't think there are grounds to deny this building permit, given the facts before us. And I just want to be very clear about the fact that like, this is the one case before us and it has no bearing on the future. It is not drawing from the past, is what is before us. And given the proximity of where this property is related to other houses, given the fact that the public safety experts in town do not have concerns, and if you just go drive out and see it, you can see there's a clear turnaround and a fire hydrant. We've got the school bus issue taken care of. So from a public safety perspective, I don't think there's an argument there. And then if you look at the other language around scattered and like premature development, I think that is subjective, as Mark Zinkel said. It is all of this is subjective, but I think if you look at that spot of Boundary Road and its proximity to the other house, and my memory of other houses as you drive out that road, it's not completely empty. There's other houses on that road. I think that that's a tough argument to make, that somehow a house right there would disrupt the nature of that spot. No, there's another house right there. And I think if people are very concerned about conservation and keeping class 6 roads not built upon, then people should look at the trail option, look at conserving chunks of land in town that are for sale. And we are going to look into what we can do in terms of restrictions. I think if there's an option to do a blanket restriction on class 6 roads, that's something we will definitely discuss. If it's something we can't legally do, we're not going to break the law. So I think that's sort of where I stand, that I don't see grounds to fairly deny a building permit to these property owners. That is what's before us.
Can I just get a clarification, Sabrina?
Yes.
We're not authorizing the building permit. We're authorizing them to apply for a building permit without the restriction of the class 6 road. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's how the motion goes.
Right.
All of the requirements of a building permit are still in effect.
All the requirements of a building permit are still in effect.
Right.
Yeah.
And as long as that's how the motion reads, that's fine.
Okay. Okay. Any other discussion or?
I can make a motion, but I don't want to cut off the debate among the board members.
I'm vastly outnumbered, so.
But Ken, I'm seriously curious, on what grounds do you say no?
I view this as not a taking if we say no.
But we're not talking about a taking.
And I'm honoring what was happened at town
But
meeting.
how do you, but no, I'm not trying to like be argumentative. I'm honestly just curious. If that was a completely different issue and it was about converting that section of road, and this is a separate issue about issuing a permit, how are you trying to apply that here?
Like I said originally, I'm not an attorney.
Well, you don't have to be
I
a
view
lawyer.
the taking is a very significant portion of the interpretation. And I don't think that there is a taking here.
But I just want to be clear for the record, whether or not a taking is happening is not what we're discussing. And that's not for us to decide. It's about whether or not there's a road access issue there and whether or not we think that it's like, it would be sporadic development.
Well, the question has been called.
I know, for the record, I wanted to like pull the thread on that a little bit because I just don't think town meeting's relevant. And I just wanted to be clear that we're not talking about whether there's a taking or not. That's not what's before us.
What, on the town meeting, what I don't understand is if a vote to change it to a class A trail wouldn't have passed, but a vote to change it to a class 5 road also doesn't pass. What is this? What is this piece of land and what is this?
Status quo.
Right. It's just like, it's like an arbitrary.
All we know is what happened at town meeting.
Yeah.
The rest is all hypothetical either way.
I'm going to make a motion that we approve the authorization of the building permit for this applicant, provided they abide by our applicable building requirements to get a building permit. And that we have them execute the waiver of liability that's in the form that's in our materials. Or have them execute it, excuse me. Well, both of us actually, we sign it too.
Okay. Jeff, did that satisfy your concerns about the language of the motion?
Actually, I was screaming at my phone, but it was on mute, so. Stephen's motion starts off with authorizing the building permit, and I don't think that's the right language. Authorizing them to apply for a building permit and meeting the necessary requirements for a building permit is, in my opinion, more appropriate.
That's fine. I don't have a problem with that change. But we are authorizing, if they meet all the requirements for a building permit, we are authorizing the issuance of the building permit.
Yes, but we don't authorize the building permits. The
Right.
planning department does. That's my only concern.
Okay, so Stephen's motion as amended by Jeff. So I'll second it. Do a roll call vote. Stephen?
Yes.
Ken?
No.
I'm a yes.
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, it's 4-1. All right. Thank you to everyone who commented and who emailed us. And there'll be more to come on us developing a policy moving forward. So I don't know that we have anything else for the public.
Public forum? We don't have any more public forums?
Does anyone else want to speak on something not related to this issue? All right, so we have 3 non-publics. So we will go into non-public and we will adjourn after that and not conduct any other business. So I will move that we go into non-public under RSA 91A3 to B, A, and D. It's hiring personnel and leasing of property.
Second.
Okay, Ken seconded that. Stephen?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Jeff, going into non-public?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.